Salutations, one and all, and welcome to RWBY Revisited. In this installment, let's examine the Huntsmen Academies. Please be aware that spoilers for all seasons will follow, and any material revealed or expounded upon in outside sources will not be weighted as heavily as that seen in the show. The 4 Huntsmen Academies are renowned throughout Remnant. Beacon, Haven, Atlas, and Shade Academies are where talented young individuals from across Remnant attend to train and hone their skills so that they may become fully fledged huntsmen and huntresses. Beacon is the primary setting of the first 3 seasons of the show, but despite this, we don't have extensive information about the workings of the academies. Now, each academy has its own rules and methods, but they share the function of taking various prospective students and turning them into warriors. Given that these schools are the final stop on each aspirant's journey, you'd think that this would be the most focused and driven period of their education. After all, upon graduation, they're granted their huntsman licenses. That profession largely revolves around combat. To that end, one would imagine that all other forms of education, from literacy to math to science, would all be taken care of prior to reaching this level, freeing this stage of their journey up to focus solely on gaining experience. But we see instances of professors giving a history exam. While not completely out of the question, this does seem a little odd, as an academy dedicated to a combat profession would want its graduates to be as proficient as possible at their new job. After all, people would begin to notice if alumni from a specific academy weren't as skilled as the others. While Team RWBY do shadow Professor Oobleck, this sort of thing seems to be something done less frequently than the standard classes. Perhaps this is simply because Team RWBY were in their first year, but field experience is likely what these students would require the most of from their time here. Following a fully fledged huntsman or huntress in the field so that they can show the students how it's done, as well as allowing these instructors to gain a rapport with their students and provide them with tailored training and advice would be instrumental in their development. Things like where certain varieties of grimm can be found, how to combat them, field medicine, regional laws dictating legal responses to bandit incursions, and more would all be paramount to their future, because different kingdoms will more than likely have their own laws. Imagine if you were a huntsman or huntress that normally operated out of Vacuo and took a job that brought you to Vale, only to find out that some of your equipment is illegal there. That might put a damper on your mission quite quickly.
Is that legal?
But huntsmen do more than just fight grimm. They can also face off against bandits or other human and faunus opponents. And while they aren't as robust as grimm, they are all the more dangerous for their ability to think and fight on an equal footing to a huntsman. This means that students would also need to train against other humans and faunus. Not just against each other, though that would likely be the bulk of their practicing, but against their instructors as well. I remember when I would spar against my instructor, assistant instructor, and experienced black belts in my martial arts classes. That was when you could truly see why they were the rank they were. It also allows them to teach you one-on-one. My instructor never seemed to move quickly, but he would deflect almost everything thrown at him with ease, even against skilled opponents. My assistant instructor was a viper. She could hit someone about 3 times before they had a chance to move. The academies would likely be similar to this. It would also teach the students to be mindful of not only what they possess, but their enemies as well. Weapons and semblances have the ability to drastically alter a confrontation, and so a huntsman must be prepared for any situation. But this also brings up another question. How does one get accepted into a Huntsman Academy? We see that Ozpin, being the headmaster of Beacon, is able to pull some strings and get RWBY in, likely being invested in her silver eyes. But what about everyone else? Ozpin mentioned combat schools, which implies one of 2 things. Either roles are partitioned early on in people's lives, like combat, engineering, agriculture, etc., or that these schools place general education as a secondary priority. Surely not all applicants would be accepted. Like it or not everyone is cut out to be any profession. Someone under 5 feet tall isn't likely to be playing basketball professionally. So too are there likely exams, both written and practical, to ensure that only the best gain admittance. This would likely be the process, but there are instances that make this seem less likely. The first is Jean. He cheated his way into Beacon, having faked his transcripts. This is telling of how the system functions, as his forged documents were not detected as false and he did not pass a practical exam. Because, let's be honest, Season 1 Jean wouldn't be beating many people in a combat exam. This opens up a whole host of issues, because if Jean could fake his way in, then so too could others. This could lead to inept huntsmen graduating, or expulsion of those who can't make the cut. Which makes me wonder how the academies are funded. One would infer that students would likely pay fees to attend, which Jean shouldn't have been able to afford without the help of his parents, or that they may be government funded. Blake is another such case. While she clearly wasn't lacking in combat ability, at first anyway, the later seasons did her dirty,
The Imperial Hammer rises to strike! For the Emperor!
Leave us alone!
she didn't attend any prior combat school. Instead, she was a member of the White Fang, and while it's implied that Ozma knew of this, how did she gain admission? She would have had no records. So how do they separate the wheat from the chaff? Moving on from that, however, the headmasters of the academies are also given a seat on that nation's council. This elevates these institutions from simple combat schools to a branch of the government, albeit a distant one. If the scenes in Atlas are to be taken at face value, then councils only have roughly 5 members amongst their number. This gives the headmaster a 1/5 pull in governmental affairs. Even more so in Atlas, as the headmaster doubles as the head of the military, giving 2 seats instead of just 1. This would lend support to the notion of these institutions being government funded, as each one also functions as a housing for the cross-continental transmit tower, which allows the 4 kingdoms to communicate with each other via calls and internet. Without them, communication is restricted to a local basis. But back to the students. All of them are put into teams shortly after beginning their first year. Each school has a different method of creating these teams. These teams are always composed of 4 members, indicating that admittance may be restricted to a multiple of 4 per year. Beacon's method of forming teams is to launch the first years into the Emerald Forest, and the first person that each student makes eye contact with is their partner. After finding a partner, each pair must make their way to the abandoned temple and collect a token, the exact nature of which can vary from year to year. The 2 pairs that obtained matching tokens will form a team that will last throughout their schooling. The Emerald Forest is also home to no small number of grimm, forcing the students to prove their worth in the field, though it is uncertain if any Beacon staff will intervene if matters should turn dire. Being a huntsman is a dangerous profession, and as such, becoming one is scarcely less so. Mortality rates may be higher than 0% at these academies. We don't know the exact methods that Atlas and Haven academies use for creating their teams, but outside sources give some description of Shade's method. Students are dropped out of an Airbus 1,000 feet above the desert. The students must survive the drop, then reach a set of coordinates assigned to each of them, in which tokens are laid out. Similarly to Beacon's initiation, the matching tokens determine the teams, bypassing the partner phase. After these teams are formed, they will attend classes and train together, even sharing a single dormitory room. Interestingly, this also applies to co-ed teams, as shown by Team Juniper. I have nothing against this, but it is a strange decision. Given the age range of the typical students, they tend to be at a point in their lives where their hormones are at an all-time high, while their ability to rationalize and think about long-term risks are diminished. This could potentially result in certain activities occurring. Should a pair of students have such an encounter, the staff may discover that another being is in their academy, one not on the roster. That would certainly complicate things. The teams are also given a name that follows the color naming rule of the show, where a proper name must either be that of a color, sound like a color, or be something that evokes the image of a color. This name is formed by the first letter of each member's given name, though the first letter of the surname is occasionally used. This could possibly be a massive headache for the headmaster. I ran a D&D campaign based in RWBY, and trying to get the players to come up with character names that allowed me to create something that fits this rule was a nightmare. Keep in mind that another restriction of the team name is that the first letter of the leader's name must be the first letter of the team's name. So if you get a bunch of disjointed consonants, then there may be nothing you can form out of them. But we also don't know what happens if team members can't get along. Like it or not everyone will be able to work in such a tight-knit fashion with everyone. Personalities clash, and this may inhibit the team's ability to function. It wouldn't be in the Academy's best interests to punish a promising student due to the shortcomings of another. Can teams be shuffled, or do the Academies lock them in place for the entire 4-year duration? We may never know. The teams are also not obliged to continue working alongside each other once they've graduated. In fact, we see very few huntsmen and huntresses working in a full team out in Remnant, so it would seem as though they elected to go their separate ways, or their team didn't survive. Their leader is also decided by the headmaster. Leadership is a heavy burden, and not one that just anyone can bear. Some have the ability come naturally to them, but others must learn it over time. Either way, this may result in a headmaster not selecting the most appropriate student for the job, or having no good candidates for leadership in a given team. But can just anyone join a Huntsman Academy? What if someone who is further on in life decides that they want to become one? Would they be lumped in with the youths? That could be awkward, having someone a decade or so older having to live alongside the others. The Academies also participate in a biannual fighting tournament, known as the Vital Festival, which is broadcasted publicly and viewed by a large portion of Remnant's populace. This would not only allow for students to train against new opponents, but possibly act as a source of income, as viewers, both in the stadium and at home, may need to purchase tickets or the ability to view it. As mentioned previously though, each academy houses a tower that supports the cross-continental transmit system, a vital means of communication for Remnant. As such, you would think that the governing bodies of each nation would post their own security for it, but we see no such thing. You wouldn't want some nosy students poking around with it, or someone more nefarious posing as a student doing something worse. These towers would likely need routine maintenance as well, as parts to any machine will wear down over time, so tech specialists would likely need to visit the academies semi-frequently. But arguably the most important function of the academies is to function as a place to store the 4 relics left by the God of Light. As if they're gathered together before the time is right, the gods will return and will likely judge humanity as unfit to exist again. So keeping those out of Salem's hands is paramount. I understand the thought process behind this, but this does beg the question of where Ozma stored these relics before the academies were constructed, and what kept Salem from finding them then. Each academy has a vault hidden somewhere within it that can only be opened by its corresponding maiden. Given their hidden nature, I have to wonder how their existence remained a secret. What happened to the architects that constructed the academies? Did they notice some odd underground sections? If so, then they could have been a potential liability and would need to be disposed of.
I wasn't expecting to find the Geth here. The situation's bad.
Don't worry. I've got it under control.
Wow, that got a bit dark then, didn't it? The alternative would be that Ozma added those sections himself, but would the magic used to create it leave traces? That could then defeat the purpose of hiding the vaults in the first place. But the drawback of this strategy is that it gives your enemy a distinct target to attack. That puts Ozma on the defense, and Salem has infinite time. No defense lasts forever if the attack does. After all, neither of them truly die. Ozma has to win every time. Salem only has to win once. And then any fallen academy is hers, and she has more infinite time to either convince or force a maiden to open the vault. Ozma, however, seems to have done something different with Beacon's relic though. Salem's forces overran Beacon, and yet she doesn't seem to have procured the relic of choice. Ozma did mention that he did something different with that one, though Salem would have no way of confirming this. Given that, it's strange that she didn't force Cinder to stay and sift through the academy stone by stone until the vault was found. But, given the current state of affairs, Beacon has fallen, as has Atlas Academy. We don't know the full extent of Haven Academy, but at best it was heavily weakened by Lionheart's sabotage, leaving Shade as the only one left at full strength. That is not exactly what I would call good news. Only time will tell what becomes of them from here on out. But what do you think about the Huntsmen Academies? Do you think they're set up well, or are they flawed? Should the show have spent more time at Beacon? I know I would have enjoyed that. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a like on this video if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. I would like to thank you for watching, and may you all have a weapon in each hand.